Have you ever noticed how the most profound transformations happen in moments of solitude? In that sacred space between midnight and dawn, when the world sleeps but your purpose burns bright. This is where greatness is forged, not in the spotlight of public acclaim, but in the shadows of relentless preparation. The true measure of your character isn't what you do when everyone is watching, but who you become in those quiet moments when there's only you, your discipline, and the silent promise you've made to yourself. Those who achieve greatness understand a fundamental truth. Victory is birthed in darkness, long before it ever sees the light of day. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you find value in our time together, please consider subscribing to support this sharing of wisdom. When no one's watching, I work harder than when they're watching. There exists within you two selves, the self that performs for the world and the self that performs for no one. Which of these selves do you nurture? In the ancient traditions of Shaolin, we speak of cultivating awareness not merely of what others see, but of what remains unseen. When you step onto your path each morning, who stands as witness to your efforts? Think of the entrepreneur who sleeps beneath the glow of her workshop lights. At 3 a.m., no cameras capture her dedication, no audience applauds her sacrifice. Yet she wakes before dawn to push through another round of prototypes, driven by a silent vow she has made to herself. Her ultimate victory owes nothing to external validation and everything to this private contract between her present suffering and future triumph. You see, many speak of accountability partners, of public commitments designed to shame us into consistency. But there exists a more powerful force, the internal scorecard. This persistent, ever-present third party that whispers, "No one's watching," which means now you must work because otherwise you're full of empty promises. It becomes a continuous reinforcing cycle, you and the other you, holding the standard, behind you seeing how much you can endure. But with each challenge you overcome, you bear witness to yourself of what you are truly capable of. Have you constructed this internal scorecard? When the door closes and no one will ever know if you took the easy path or the necessary one, what choice do you make? This is where your character reveals itself, not in public declarations but in private decisions. Consider your morning routine. How much time passes between waking and meaningful work? Many spend 30 minutes getting ready to start, but this preparation often consumes your best mental energy on activities that move no needles. What if instead you learn to shrink that gap between waking and working, between one task and the next? This is not about denying rest or reflection, but about recognizing how easily comfort disguises itself as necessity. The internal scorecard asks not, "Did others see my effort?" but rather, "Did I empty the tank today?" The days you will love most when looking back on your life are not the days of ease and external praise, but those when nothing remained in reserve, when you drove yourself to the edge of your capacity and then found one more step to take. Think of your life as driving a high-performance vehicle. In the beginning, you test its limits on straightaways, seeing how high you can rev the engine. As you advance, you add turns, then elevation, then turns and elevation without guardrails, incorporating risk. The course grows increasingly complex, but your objective remains unchanged: to empty the tank, to leave nothing unexpressed, nothing unattempted. The scorecard doesn't measure where you went, but how completely you committed to the journey. And here lies a profound truth. The only person who can accurately judge your success is you, for you alone know how much remained in the tank, what resources went unused, what courage went unspent. When you stand before the mirror tonight, will you meet the gaze of someone who worked harder in privacy than they did in public? Will you recognize in yourself the rare integrity of one whose standards rise when accountability falls? This is the discipline that separates those who dream from those who become. When you're growing in a business, it's very painful. When you're stagnating and plateaued, it's very painful. When you're declining, it's very painful. This means all conditions of reality are painful. If pain is a prerequisite for reality, then it is just a signal that we are alive. How do you interpret the discomfort that accompanies growth? Many seek paths of advancement without resistance, expansion without contraction, achievement without sacrifice. But this pursuit misunderstands the fundamental nature of development. Consider the physical body. A muscle grows only through the micro-trauma of resistance. The discomfort you feel during training is not failure, but necessary signaling. The body communicating that adaptation is underway. Yet in our professional and personal development, we often misinterpret similar signals, treating pain as a problem rather than a natural component of the process. When standing at the threshold of a new challenge, anxiety rises within you. The untrained mind reads this as warning, as reason to retreat, but champions interpret anxiety as excitement, physical preparation for meaningful action. The sensations may be identical, but the framing transforms your relationship to the experience. If you feel nervous before releasing your work, before stepping onto a stage, before entering an important meeting, this isn't evidence you should avoid the experience. It suggests you haven't prepared enough. True confidence emerges not from positive thinking, but from repetition so thorough that boredom replaces anxiety. When you've practiced something until you're sick of it, until you could perform it in your sleep, the adrenal response diminishes. You've seen this scenario so many times that uncertainty fades away. Confidence at its core represents your percentage prediction that what you expect will actually happen. To build genuine confidence, accumulate evidence through repetition. You become confident not through affirmation, but confirmation. Through doing the thing successfully so many times that doubt cannot survive in the face of your experience. In the beginning of your journey, you might think pain should influence whether you proceed. Later you realize you can act despite discomfort. But the ultimate transformation occurs when pain becomes irrelevant to your decision-making process. When it stands merely as confirmation that you are breathing, engaging, risking, growing. There exists in your life right now areas of necessary pain you've been avoiding, growth you've postponed because the initial discomfort seemed too great. But what if that discomfort isn't a warning, but an invitation? What if the very resistance you feel marks the boundary between your current self and your potential? The path of personal development requires befriending uncertainty, learning to stand steady while the ground shifts beneath you, recognizing that discomfort doesn't signal danger, but engagement with reality. The quality of your life will be determined not by how effectively you avoid pain, but by how meaningfully you interpret it. When confronted with the discomfort of a new challenge tomorrow, will you contract around it, treating it as evidence you should retreat? Or will you expand through it, recognizing it as the necessary sensation of boundaries being redefined? This choice, made repeatedly in moments large and small, determines who you become. Hard work is the goal, and so it's not like work hard so that X, because as soon as you have a so that, then the X is the thing. But if the goal is to work as hard as we possibly can, then the only real output we have is who we become along the way. What do you pursue? When you set goals, where does your attention actually rest? On the destination or the journey toward it? Many fix their gaze so firmly on outcomes that they miss the transformation happening with each step. There exists a profound truth that most overlook. The person who loves walking walks further than the person who loves the destination. When your fulfillment comes from the pursuit itself rather than some future reward, you develop capacity that outcome-focused individuals cannot match. Imagine the entrepreneur again, hunched over her workbench. If her joy depends entirely on market validation, on eventual profit, on public recognition, then each day without these outcomes feels like failure. But if she finds genuine satisfaction in the solving of problems, in the refinement of her craft, in the daily evidence of her growing capabilities, then success doesn't await her in some distant future. It accompanies her in each moment of engagement. This shift transforms work from obligation to opportunity. Instead of seeing your efforts as the price you pay for eventual reward, you recognize the work itself as the reward. The pursuit becomes your button for enjoyment. Consider how this reframes the concept of work-life balance. When people say you're always working, always doing these things, they fundamentally misunderstand. You're spending your time in pursuit, in the very activities that generate meaning, growth, and fulfillment. The distinction between work and life dissolves when work becomes an expression of your deepest values, rather than merely a means to external ends. Have you experienced this inversion? The moment when effort transforms from burden to blessing, when the satisfaction of engagement outweighs the promise of accomplishment. This represents not just a change in attitude, but a complete reorientation of your relationship with achievement. When hard work becomes the goal rather than the means, measurement changes. Instead of judging each day by outcomes often beyond your control, you evaluate it by the quality of your engagement, the integrity of your effort, the emptiness of your tank at day's end. You create a feedback loop that doesn't depend on external validation, market timing, or lucky breaks, but solely on your commitment to the process. What would change if you found genuine joy in the hardest parts of your work? If instead of merely tolerating difficulty on the way to reward, you recognize difficulty itself as the arena in which your most meaningful growth occurs. This doesn't mean pretending struggle is easy, but rather understanding that struggle itself, when chosen in service to meaningful aims, represents the most direct path to becoming who you wish to be. Tonight, reflect on yesterday's efforts. Did you work to get somewhere, or did you work because the work itself expressed your highest values? Did you push through difficulties to reach easier ground, or did you recognize that the difficult ground itself was precisely where your development accelerated? Your relationship to the process, more than any outcome, determines both your fulfillment and, paradoxically, your likelihood of achieving the very outcomes that others chase directly. I remember being jarred by the experience when I pulled up in a nice car and people said, "Our boss man's here, you're too good for us now." And I was like, "You guys rooted for me, and now I did what you said you were rooting for me to do." That was when I realized people want you to do well, but not better than them. How do you handle the shifting nature of external judgment? In your journey toward mastery, you will encounter a phenomenon few discuss openly: the transformation of encouragement to resentment as your success materializes. Remember this truth: everyone believes in the American dream until it comes true for someone else. When you sleep on the gym floor, when you start with nothing, people cheer your ambition. Your struggle fits a narrative they find comfortable, the underdog working against the odds. But the moment visible success arrives, the moment you pull up in a nicer car, hire your first employees, achieve the recognition they claim to want for you, the narrative shifts. The very people who encouraged you now find reasons to diminish your achievement. This represents not personal betrayal, but human nature. Your success forces others to confront their own unrealized potential, their own unexplored capacities. Rather than using your achievement as inspiration, many find it easier to recast you as lucky, to decide you've changed, to protect their self-image by diminishing your journey. The sign of success is often the hate you receive along the way. Yet this presents a critical choice point. Will you bend the knee to their judgment, conforming to make others comfortable? Or will you recognize that retreating to conformity leads precisely where you've already been, a destination you deliberately chose to leave? The path less traveled remains less traveled for this exact reason. The social pressure to rejoin the conventional doesn't diminish with your first steps toward distinction, it intensifies. Yet remember, the best way to guarantee not having the life you want is to do what everyone else is doing, unless you want what everyone else has, which upon honest reflection no one truly does. There exists a massive delay between when you start behaving like a winner and when you start winning. The bigger the mountain you climb, the greater this lag becomes. Most abandon their journey during this gap, mistaking the absence of immediate results for evidence they're on the wrong path. They forget that with greater ambition comes greater delay in feedback. What if the criticism you receive isn't evidence you should change course, but confirmation you're finally making progress? What if the uncomfortable conversations, the social awkwardness, the period where you don't quite fit with your old friends but haven't yet achieved the outcomes to join a new community? What if this lonely chapter represents not failure, but necessary transition? Every single person who has done something meaningful with their life has walked through this exact chapter. the chapter where the hate arrives before the validation, where doubt speaks louder than evidence, where the destination remains invisible, but the comfortable shore behind grows distant. The skills you develop during these early days, these trench battles, frequently become your greatest advantages later. The context you gain, the resilience you build, the distinctions you master. These become arrows in your quiver for slaying future, bigger dragons. Rather than lamenting this period, recognize it as essential preparation for challenges you cannot yet see, but will inevitably face. Tonight, examine your relationship with external judgment. Have you allowed others' opinions, whether praise or criticism, to hold undue influence over your direction? Have you mistaken temporary social discomfort for evidence you should retreat? The path toward your highest contribution necessarily leads through territory others find threatening. Your willingness to traverse this uncomfortable ground, to bear witness to yourself even when no one else does, determines whether potential remains merely potential or transforms into impact. I think what everyone listening lacks is the context on how hard work is, not in that it's complex, but just in that it's a continuous and unending focus on one thing, and noticing the details that separate mediocrity from greatness. What separates those who achieve excellence from those who merely aspire to it? Many assume the distinction lies in talent, opportunity, or luck. But look closer at any field of human achievement, and a different pattern emerges. Excellence rarely results from complexity. It emerges from simplicity applied with unprecedented focus, from attention sustained not just through excitement or convenience, but through resistance, boredom, and doubt. The master differs from the amateur not primarily in knowledge but in their relationship with repetition. Consider your own pursuit. How many things are you trying to become exceptional at simultaneously? The sobering truth is that greatness demands a narrowing of focus, a deliberate limitation. Once you achieve greatness in one domain, you realize the tremendous investment required and face the humbling recognition that there are very few things you can truly master in a single lifetime. This represents not limitation but liberation. Instead of fragmented attention across dozens of interests, what if you selected the 2 or 3 areas where your contribution could be most meaningful? What if you committed to the 5 to 7 years of focused development required for exceptional capacity in these domains? Most never make this choice, preferring the comfortable mediocrity of divided attention to the demanding excellence of concentration. Excellence reveals itself in details invisible to the untrained eye. The subtle distinctions between acceptable and extraordinary often appear insignificant to observers, but represent the entirety of the master's focus. Have you developed the perceptual capacity to recognize these distinctions in your field? Do you notice what separates good from great, or do these gradations remain invisible to you? If you cannot yet see the difference, that represents the opportunity hard work reveals. Most define hard work by the most strenuous effort they've personally exerted, not by the level of effort required to achieve the outcomes they claim to want. This misalignment between perceived effort and necessary investment explains much disappointment. The person who complains about their business's performance while working on the wrong priorities with inconsistent focus hasn't yet understood the nature of excellence. Output results from volume multiplied by leverage. How many repetitions you perform, multiplied by how much you accomplish with each repetition. This answers the false dichotomy of work smart or work hard. You must do both. Perform as many reps as possible with the maximum leverage available. The skilled caller making 100 calls might produce 10 times more result than the unskilled caller making the same number. But skill develops only through volume, creating a virtuous cycle where doing more helps you get better, which helps you get more from what you do. Consider implementing the rule of open to goal in your own practice. Rather than working fixed hours, commit to working until you hit your target, whether that means finishing at noon or midnight. This aligns your effort with outcomes rather than appearances, focusing attention on results rather than activity. Tonight, examine the focus of your development. Have you tried to become good at too many things simultaneously, diluting your potential for excellence? Where could you benefit from narrowing your focus, increasing your repetitions, and refining your perception of the details that separate acceptable from exceptional? Excellence doesn't demand superhuman capacity. It requires human capacity, applied with inhuman consistency. It's rarely the information or the intensity that makes things hard. It's the sticking with it that makes it hard. The desire we have to quit is simply breaking the consistency. That's why consistency has always been the hardest thing for most people to achieve. How do you maintain momentum when results remain invisible? Many approach achievement backwards. They apply significant intensity for short periods, then abandon their efforts before consistency can yield results. They suffer more in these brief, overwhelming pushes than would be required over a longer period of sustainable effort. The leading indicator of success is the ability to act without immediate feedback, to maintain consistent behavior when nothing appears to be happening. Progress typically unfolds more slowly than you expect, then accelerates faster than you can imagine. The mistake lies in expecting the acceleration without enduring the initial phase of apparent stagnation. Consider the evidence you give yourself through your actions. A great portion of your identity emerges from the proof you accumulate of your capabilities. If you wish to build toward a different version of yourself, begin by stacking evidence that aligns with that future self. Take the shot, begin the business, create the content. Whether it succeeds immediately matters less than the identity shift that occurs when you prove to yourself you're the kind of person who takes action. The business never works until it's the one that does. The episode doesn't take off except for the one that does. Whether it takes 10 attempts or 10,000, one eventually succeeds because volume improves quality. This makes not quitting the most valuable skill you can develop. With an infinite game perspective, the point isn't to win, but to keep playing, to maintain the conditions that make ongoing participation possible. Even those fixated on becoming number one must confront the temporary nature of such achievement. By what metric would you measure supremacy? Enterprise value, growth, profit, revenue? Even if you became the richest by some measure, history shows no one maintains such position indefinitely. You might touch the top momentarily before losing that status. The finite nature of such goals makes them ultimately unsatisfying. By contrast, the competitor whose objective is to continue playing cannot be beaten, because by playing they achieve their aim. This explains why the initial phase of any meaningful pursuit requires such tremendous effort to overcome inertia. Starting from complete stillness, you must generate escape velocity, pushing past disbelief, criticism, and self-doubt. You climb through trenches and over hurdles until reaching an altitude where momentum begins to work with rather than against you. When others say, "Must be nice," they fail to see the countless hours when nobody was watching, the chronic uncertainty, the criticism from friends, the accumulation of small choices that eventually created enough momentum for visible progress. If they could witness the full journey rather than merely its outcome, envy would transform to either respect or relief that they hadn't paid such price. Tonight, examine your relationship with consistency. Where have you substituted intensity for persistence? Where have you abandoned efforts just before consistency could yield results? What evidence are you giving yourself about your capabilities through your daily actions? Remember that greatness rarely emerges from momentary heroics, but from ordinary disciplines practiced until they become extraordinary capacities. Remember that your ultimate victory comes not from external validation, but from the private contract you make with yourself. To empty the tank each day, to find joy in the process, to work harder when no one is watching than when they are. In this commitment, you discover not just achievement, but transformation. If this message resonates, please share it with someone who might benefit from hearing it. Your growth serves not just your own development, but creates possibility for others still finding their path. And if you haven't yet, consider subscribing to join our community of seekers committed to continuous evolution. See you next time. Keep your eyes open, your mind curious, and your spirit evolving.